Welcome, everyone. This is Pine Leaf Needles, and you're listening to LOTRO Players News, where we take a look at the latest news in LOTRO and here at LOTRO Players. And this week we have with us Andang,
Hey everybody.
Draculetta,
Hey, how's it going?
Braxwolf,
Hello, Lotro.
and this week we have not one, but two special guests, two for the price of one. So please welcome with us first Dr. Corey Olson
Hey, good evening.
and Trish Lambert.
Hello.
And they are with Mythgard. So we will begin by asking a few questions of them. And I'm going to begin by asking you, how did you get into the Lord of the Rings?
How do we get into the Lord of the Rings?
Online would probably be a shorter story. How did you get into Lord of the Rings online?
Well,
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, I discovered Tolkien a long time ago when I was a kid. Lord of the Rings Online, I've been basically hearing about the game for a very long time. Back, especially from a bunch of the Lonely Mountain Band folks, especially John DiBartolo and Laura Burkholz and people back when I started the Silmarillion seminar, which feels like ages ago now. I kept hearing a lot about Lotro, and I was really impressed by everything that I heard. But I resisted for a long time, mostly because I was afraid that I would become completely addicted, of which there is no small risk, even now to this day. But anyway, so I resisted for a long time. But what really broke me down was hearing Chris Pearson, the senior lore master, talk about it. He gave a small talk at MythCon, the conference of the Mythopoeic Society, in August, and just hearing him talk more about what they do, and I'd always known that Lotro was, very respectful to the lore, but I was so fascinated in hearing about really the depth of the engagement of the development team with the books and with Tolkien's world, that I just decided, like, okay, no, I really need to. I totally need to see this for myself. So that's what started me out.
all right. And Trish, what's your story?
I I just followed along in Corey's wake. Actually, he when he got back from MythCon, he was just so excited about it. And as he said, we've had actually, it turns out, quite a number of Myth Guardians, both the students at the institute and also the folks in the academy and fans of the podcast have been loyal Lotro players. And I remember I had tried a few years ago. For some reason, I don't know why I didn't continue. But I guess maybe back then I just didn't have, like the community of people around me. But after Corey got back from MythCon, and Laura Burkholz especially has been one who's very encouraging of me to get into it, and I jumped with both feet, and it is as addictive as Corey was afraid it was going to be. But it's great, and I agree. I mean, I think it's fascinating to see what they've done with the lore in this game.
Yeah,
Plus, it's my first MMO ever, so that's really interesting too.
yeah, it was funny when Trish and I started playing it pretty much the same time, and our two first characters were kind of like going in parallel. In fact, I was a little bit ahead of her for a little while.
For a little while.
There, a very little while, and then like I just completely gave up, and it was not too long before like Trish's second alt was passing my one character level. It was pretty much over at that point.
Well, it's because you have a life, you see, Corey. So yeah, I'm up to 6 alts now, and we've been
6
playing
of them.
since the end of August. Yeah, it's
I like how Pineleaf, the alt master, was impressed by the amount of alts you have.
it's actually kind of embarrassing to admit that. But anyway, yes, I do. I'm also a big fan of the podcast, so consider me a
All right.
fangirl,
That's
because
good
you
to
guys
hear.
have helped me out a lot. Yes.
All right, then. How did you get the idea then for Mythgard Mondays?
Well, basically, it was something that we as soon as we started playing, and there are basically two things that really struck us. One is the thing that I talked about before, about how rich the world is and the game is from a pure lore perspective. So I was very quickly thinking like, oh yeah, man, this would be a great, I would love to do a podcast series on this and really sort of look at the way in which they are doing the lore in the game and everything. But of course, we also knew, Trish was like, well, there are lots of our, Mythgard people who are in LOTRO, and there are probably a lot of people in LOTRO who would be really interested to, to sort of learn more about Mythgard and what we do. We obviously have a lot in common. So, we decided we wanted to, to kind of get together with more people. And so we kind of, Mythgard Monday, we just sort of threw that out there one time. Trish, we didn't even announce, we announced that almost nowhere, right? Wasn't there like one or two places where we were?
Yeah, well, because I was so nervous, I wasn't sure what kind of attendance we'd have, so I announced it in all of like 3 Facebook, like the Facebook page we had set up, and then 2 other Facebook pages, and that was it. And we had, I think even the first night, 20. I think Brax, you were there the first night. I can't remember. I don't think
that
Henry was
sounds about right. And I found it through I think a tweet that Dr. Olson sent out.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because he said we're going to be in front of the Bird and Baby at this time, and I forget the way you worded it, but it was something that sounded like you were going to announce something, and that's why I thought, well, maybe I'll just pop in just to see what's going on.
He tantalized people. That's how we got all those.
Yeah, he
there.
does like to tantalize.
Yes.
Wow,
Yeah, but no, it was great. Yeah, so I mean, it was, and the thing what I was, I've been talking about on Mythgard Mondays from the beginning is, since I'm new to the game, there's so much that I need to learn. There's so much that I want to experience, a bunch of things that I need help with. Like, for instance, I'm delighted finally to have gotten through all 4 instances in Fornost, for instance, which took me a lot of help, really, to get there.
And the Gartha Garwin.
Gartha Garwin, yes, finally. But anyway, I mean, because there were a bunch of those things that, I really like soloing. I really like going through, sort of slowly and carefully, and sort of playing the game like I read books at a snail's pace. And just sort of exploring and thinking about the story and thinking about the relationship with the lore and everything. And but of course, there are all these areas that like I can't do on my own, and places that I haven't been able to go, and parts of the game that I haven't seen. So it's been really fun to have people along to sort of show me how to do things, and to sort of walk me through all the elements of the game that I haven't had a chance to do. I've been learning a lot, and it's definitely been a lot of fun.
And for those people who are Corey's fans, like on the podcast, we're kind of collecting things that you would never expect to hear Corey Olson say on Mythgard Monday. Like, for example, don't forget to loot the corpse.
Don't forget to loot the corpse. That's right.
Like, you would never expect to hear the Tolkien professor say that.
In Fornost, of course. Yes.
In Fornost.
Yeah,
Right.
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, then. What then exactly is the LOTRO project, then?
Oh, well, the LOTRO project is that's basically sort of bringing to fulfillment the idea that I had, that sort of struck me right away about wanting to do a podcast. And as is not uncommon with my ideas, it's
They grow
kind
in
of
the telling.
yes, they grow in the town and become these enormously ambitious things. So instead of being like, hey, maybe I could do a podcast series where I just kind of like talk my way through a bunch of LOTRO stuff, instead I now have this much bigger idea of doing really more like a course, an open course, kind of like the Mythgard Academy courses we do, which are free for everybody. And of course, the Mythgard Academy classes are just focusing on a particular book at a time, as people elect it. But for the LOTRO one, basically, I'm thinking about doing a similar format where we just do an open class, and I want to get people reading, reading the books, reading the sort of the relevant pieces of lore, and then looking at the ways in which they've put together particular regions. I would probably do a couple class sessions on a particular region, on like each particular region. We'd look at the overall epic quest stories, and and just kind of think about LOTRO as adaptation. So in the course that I'm planning to do, um, there's I'm gonna have to, there's a lot I'm gonna have to be familiar with. So Mythgard Monday has been like course prep. That's what I keep telling my wife. I'm like, sorry, I got class prep tonight. I'm really got to keep my nose to the grindstone here. But anyway,
Got to
um,
make the sacrifice.
exactly. So, and we're probably, we have plans now with the people at Turbine to broadcast some episodes of stuff that we're going to do later on down the road as sort of kind of transitional stuff. I want to do some kind of lore talks. Um, as we go through particular areas, as I kind of track the epic quest, the class as I see it, the open course that I want to do, I think is going to be broader. And the main thing is it's not going to be in game. I'm going to run it through our regular classroom interface. I'm probably going to have some video materials and some screenshots and things so that we can be looking at some stuff when I want to talk about the LOTRO stuff. But of course, it's also going to be dealing with the text and doing some close reading of the books and then really thinking about the way that LOTRO is doing their adaptation. Kind of like, in some ways like the kinds of discussions we were having in Riddles in the Dark about the Hobbit film adaptations. Thinking about the stories and what kind of challenges there are. Think just as there, we were constantly asking the question, what would you have to do? How do you take this story and translate that into a visual medium? For a movie. Here we'd be thinking the same thing, but of course about the game world environment and what kind of challenges there are and how they do their storytelling and stuff. I've been really impressed by LOTRO's storytelling. That's the thing that I really didn't expect when I started playing LOTRO, is how, and that was another thing that I heard about in that talk at August that really intrigued me. Not just to sort of set up a world and let you run around and kill things in it, but rather to really have somehow have an MMO world which has sort of a linear plot and follows along with the story of the Lord of the Rings. I was really curious to see how they handled it, and I've been really impressed by how they've handled it. I think it's really fascinating.
I think what's most amazing is how closely it reads like Tolkien. So at times, when it seems like they're trying to. There's some parts where it's just like that feels just out of Tolkien, even though it's not. And I think they've done a really good job with that.
I agree. I love many of the terrains and the Lone Lands. I did really like that one.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things
right.
about the LOTRO project, I'll just put in here, is we talked about, like Corey said, talked about a podcast, and we kind of rolled it around for a while, and it was kind of like, well, if it's a podcast, what percentage of the people who listen to the podcasts are going to listen to that? It's like we were just like, how are we going to make it a podcast about LOTRO? And so it kind of evolved, and that's what he meant, like it grew in the telling, and then the idea of the course really makes sense, because the person taking the course doesn't have to be playing the game, and but it still is going to be this really rich course about adaptation and about how one particular type of adaptation has taken place and how how well or not well it's been done. And I think that's going to reach a much wider audience, much wider audience to be interested in it. Maybe bring new players into the game too. That wouldn't be bad either.
Yeah.
All right then. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when I came back from Mythmoot, I mentioned something about the Silmarillion that you're planning. Anything you want to add about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's really kind of the direct kind of error of Riddles in the Dark, as we're bringing Riddles in the Dark to an end, sort of kind of what to do next. And it occurred to me, because I've been wanting to go back to the Silmarillion for a while now. I haven't really done anything with the Silmarillion ever since we finished the Silmarillion seminar, and the Silmarillion seminar was such an awesome way to kind of talk our way through the Silmarillion. And I've gotten so many emails over the years. I still do. I still get them all the time from people who are like, "The Silmarillion seminar was great. I finished the book for the first time," and that's fantastic. And and so I really kind of wanted to get back to that and really kind of continue that work of helping to kind of open people's eyes to the kind of the greater world of Tolkien's stories, the greater world of Tolkien's mythologies. And because I mean the Silmarillion stuff and the Silmarillion and like all of that extra sort of storytelling thinking, all of that, the really complicated network of stories and ideas that Tolkien developed throughout his life, out of which the Lord of the Rings and to some extent the Hobbit grew. Is there's so much of it and it's so rich and it's so interesting, but again so few, comparatively few Tolkien readers really get into it, really come to appreciate it. So, and then as we've been doing Riddles in the Dark, especially this third year, increasingly I've been focusing on, it's like, okay, I don't really, like, I'm getting less and less interested in trying to guess like what Peter Jackson wants to do. And instead I just want to talk about like what would be fun, like what would be awesome. That's been my rule. All of my, when I've been trying to guess this year, I said I decided I'm not going to try to guess what Peter Jackson's doing. I'm just going to say what I think would be cool. And so the idea came to me: wouldn't it be really fun to do a podcast series where what we did was just plan our own adaptation? So the Silmarillion is never going to, it's very likely never to see film, at least in any of our lifetimes. So here we have like, functionally a blank slate. We're not going to be bumping up against anybody else's depictions because there's unlikely to be anybody else's depictions. So let's do this. So let's sit down and let's plan this out in detail. Let's figure out, because the kind of imaginative investment that you get in that. And I was just thinking, like, if the Silmarillion seminar was fun, just kind of going through the text and talking about it, how much more engaging is it going to be for people to really kind of activate their own imaginations and think about, not just like, okay, let me try again to keep straight the names of like all of those, what Mike Jout calls the effing elves, all of those Noldor whose names start with F that everybody always gets. Wait, was that Fingon or Finrod again? I can't remember. And again, that's the problem. Like for too many people, like even for really enthusiastic readers, so often all of those names and things they're just like lists on a page, like stuff that if you're engaged, you'll memorize them, right? Like really diehard people will memorize this stuff, but it's just a memorization act. Wouldn't it be cooler to really make these things come alive so that people really begin to think about what do we know about Fingon? What was he like? And truly try to build his character and his story. So the Silmarillion film project, we're going to engage in a very, very long-term period of make-believe, in which we pretend we are developing, we are planning a TV series, multi-year TV series adaptation of the Silmarillion. And we're going to do the whole. I insist on doing the whole thing. Several people have been like, "Well, I don't know. Some of it's not going to work." I'm like, "Oh no, it'll all work. We're going to do the whole. We're starting with the Ainulindalë, and we're going all the way through."
This is a 5-year project, then.
We're thinking 30.
30. Yeah. I mean, like, seriously, Dave and I kind of roughed out. I'm just one afternoon, just kind of chatting about it. We roughed out at least 10 seasons, basically, between the Ainulindalë and the War of Wrath. So this could go on for a while.
And that's just the War of Wrath, yeah.
And that's just the War of Wrath. That's assuming we stop at the War of Wrath. Which, why would we do that, right? I mean, Numenor. Numenor. Like, Numenor is such an is such an icon of Tolkien's world, right? I mean, the lost city of Numenor, all the Atlantis stuff, and how evocative the idea of the lost Numenor, but we know almost nothing about it. We get these few small glimpses of Numenorian culture and what but there have to be just hundreds of really interesting stories there.
Yes, they were drowned, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
All right. let's get on.
We could just we just take over the whole podcast. Pine Lake,
Right,
just talk
yeah.
about
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
Let's head into our new player questions. And we'll
Oh,
begin with something really basic. And that is that since there's such a steep learning curve when you start out LOTRO, is what would you recommend as the first class of a person brand new to MMOs in general and in LOTRO in particular? Andy.
Yeah, I think in general, just DPS heavy classes are usually pretty good. Um, Champions and hunters and those type of things. Burglars are pretty complex, even though they are DPS heavy, so I wouldn't recommend those. But I think anything that is just very easy, where you can just button mash and focus more on the systems the MMO is introducing you than the actual character you're playing, I think is important.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I'm kind of biased because, I mean, I haven't played all that many characters, so I can't speak to all of them, but I started with a Guardian, and that was real easy. In fact, I
Yep.
remember when Trish and I were both starting out. She started with a Hunter, and I started with the Guardian, which worked out pretty well for us to be able to fellow together when we were starting out. But
long as
I
they didn't
remember,
run
I
ahead.
remember how much easier it was for you. I mean, you remember, Trish, how much you used to struggle back when you were like level 20 and I was level 20, and I was like, dude,
Yeah.
I soloed that.
You're
And
like,
you were like, I need
I'm
help.
like, how could you solo that? It's for a fellowship. He's like, oh, I can do that. No problem. You know?
Yeah,
Because I
I
mean,
was like,
so the Guardian being somebody whose moves are simple. There's very little that's complex about the Guardian. And you're like as hard to kill as a cockroach. So it's really nice. And that kind of resilience was quite handy on many occasions.
All right. Anyone else have any opinions on the matter? Track?
Yeah, I would say same as what Anding said, something that's very DPS heavy. And in general, I would say the hunter. It's easy at lower levels. It's I think once you get into the higher levels and you get more skills, that's when the hunter can be a little bit more tricky. But at the lower levels, it's basically just pew pew until it's dead. So that would be something good for a new player, I think.
Yeah, I think the only issue that you can run into with the hunter is just that it's a light armor class,
Right,
and
yeah.
light armor classes are tough. That's why I think the champion's probably the better option, but it also comes down to personal choice too. Like, do you like to look up close at the ugly orcs, or do you like to keep them at a distance with the hunter?
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing, about the hunter. It's just a medium class, so you got to watch how many mobs you pull on you at once. If you don't kill them before they get to you, if you get 2 or 3 mobs around you, you're probably gonna die.
that's probably my biggest, I mean, I would definitely say I'm the newest player here, at least when it comes to MMOs. And I did start with a hunter on the advice of a friend of mine. And I will say that I actually like to keep my mobs at a distance. I mean, I also now have a warden and a captain, and I have to remember, and a Bjorning, I gotta go out, I gotta go get in their face, because I'd rather be away from them. But I did learn actually relatively quickly that I need to be slightly over level for the places I go solo, because I can die pretty quickly.
I would say
So,
Bjorning is another good one for survivability anyway.
That's true.
It's not that complex either.
That's true.
I would say stay away from Lore Master for your first tune, because that is not only a difficult class to learn because the mechanics are just difficult, but it's also not very survivable. It's very squishy. You talk about a hunter, a Lore Master dies quick.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you do have your pets. I mean, the Lore Master is I have a Lore Master alt, which was the first other character I played other than the Guardian, and I didn't find a hard time staying alive at low levels, just because, I mean, giant bear, like
Yeah.
it was. And in fact, I spent. I spent very little time fighting. Not only was I not drawing aggro from mobs, I wouldn't even see them. I just sick my Raven on them, and somewhere off screen, my Raven would kill something, would kill it, and then come back, and I'd be like, hey, thanks, dude.
Yeah. Somewhere between level 30 and 50, the Lore Master starts to get pretty difficult as far as
Yes.
difficulty goes.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
classes I would recommend just not to use in general as a new player would probably be Lore Masters for the higher up, Wardens just because the number of gambits and things they have,
Mhm.
although they can be pretty good at button mashing if you just want to mindlessly do things.
Mhm.
The Burglar does not seem like something that's very friendly. And the minstrel's kind of a toss-up, depending on. I mean, it's very easy to do damage and stuff like that, but if you're wanting to learn healing, it can be kind of challenging.
Well, but if you have a new group that's coming together and you're going to be together and you're all new, then someone's going to have to be the healer and someone's going to have to learn. In that case, I would recommend as a healer the minstrel rather than the runekeeper.
Yes.
One, because I think the minstrel's a lot easier to figure out how to do the healing with. And the other is I would avoid the runekeeper, warden, and Bjorning simply because you have to purchase those classes while the others come with the game.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And that's an additional thing to add on top of the
That's
other
true.
things that are mentioned already.
Yeah.
All right, what about race?
No preference.
The main thing is
yeah, that's a
race.
good question.
Race doesn't really affect your stats too much, and
Right.
especially compared to other MMOs. And so really it is, just as Brax said, down to personal preference. You know, if you don't like elves, don't pick an elf. If you really like hobbits, pick a hobbit, you know, that type of thing. So
Yes, I do have this predilection for hobbits.
There is it seems to me a big difference in the style of play in the starter area. I mean, the Shire
Yeah.
is totally there is no equivalent to the spoiled pie quest chain, for instance, in Erin or in Bree. I mean, there's just, you only do that kind of thing in the Shire. So, yeah, or like the mail delivery, for crying out loud. You know, so the spirit of the game seems to me strikingly different for starting Hobbit characters.
yeah, I think
Plus
I
hobbits,
think
I mean, like Hobbit emotes are so much more than anybody else's. You know, the hobbits laugh
yeah.
is a riot. You know, when they wave, they jump up and down. I mean, hobbits can. I think for a first-time player, Hobbit would be really fun to play.
Yeah, and I think it's also, if you don't want so many combat quests, especially, you know, getting new into an MMO, LOTRO has a lot of stuff to kill. Basically, it's based on killing stuff. And so if you don't want to do that type of stuff at the start, especially, Hobbit's a great choice. And usually that kind of goes along with, you know, if you like Hobbits, you probably like that type of thing anyway. So I think it goes hand in hand.
Yeah. No, the pies and the hungry hobbits and the nosy hobbits, you know, for the quick post quests and everything. I mean, it's very hobbity. Extremely hobbity.
All right. Then our third one then is crafting vocation. Anyone have any preferences on that matter?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I started off as an explorer, and I think that's a great one to start with, personally, because you've got two of the the material gathering, and then the tailor. And
I don't know. I always find the gathering bit to be a pain, so I tend to avoid the explorer for that very reason.
but for first characters though, I mean, one thing that I will say, I started off my guardian, which was my first character, was a historian, because of course, like, I was like, well, I've got to be a scholar, right?
Oh, that's the toughest though.
That's kind of a given. So I was a historian, and I was fine with the scholar stuff. But my big problem was, and again, this, I think, for a brand new player, one of the challenges is going to be sort of recognizing that there are going to be a bunch of your crafts that you just can't do. Like, you can't. Like, I was shocked to find, because I was, of course, as a historian, I was a weaponsmith, but I was shocked to find that I couldn't buy copper ingots. And I'm like, I've got to have all these bronze ingots, and I can't get them anywhere. And I mean, I eventually figured it out. Unfortunately, Trish was a prospector, so Trish was over there, like, faithfully smelting bronze ingots for me for a long time. And I know that, like, it's designed to encourage that kind of thing, but I think, for a new player, I think it was something that really kind of took me aback at first. So that is another advantage to the explorer, or to any of the guys. Like the woodsman is pretty good too, because you can collect wood and then use it.
Right.
So any of the vocations which are kind of self-contained that way, where you can collect your own supplies that you need to use in your building craft, I think is what I would recommend for a first-time player.
I always like being a yeoman.
Yeah, that's good.
I really like cooking. Cooking is, I think, my favorite of the crafts. So I haven't played a yeoman, but I have plans. I'm looking forward to playing a yeoman.
Trying to remember. I can't remember if we were talking on the phone or if we were texting one day, and I said, so what are you doing? He says, I am growing barley.
That's right. Oh yeah. Because see, there you go. Like I was because my son started a character who was a cook but couldn't farm, and he was like, "Where do I get barley?" This is my 6-year-old son. He's like, "I need barley. Where can I get barley?" So I'm like, "Well, all right." Back in with my. Fortunately, my guardian was a historian and thus a farmer. So I was. I'm like, all right, I'm growing barley for an hour tonight. So I grew a massive barley crop to send to my son.
You're such
But
a good
yeah.
dad.
Yeah, exactly. That's true dedication right there.
All right. Anyone have anything else they wish to add before we go on to the game news? Since this is a news podcast.
I would like to point out that for me personally, I did try out crafting, but it's not required. It's not something that a new player has to stick with if you don't want to. It's more just, if you're interested, you can play the whole game without ever having to craft. I'm really glad that the system is there. I really enjoy it, but you don't have to do it. Don't feel like you have to farm for however long to get to the top tier just so that you can go to the next area. I know some players that have that misconception, I guess.
Yeah, it's very definitely optional, and I have quite a number of characters of mine who have not bothered at all with crafting.
That's a good
All
point.
right. All right, let's head into the game news then. We'll begin with the little bit of news from concerning the server transfers in Brax. What's this all about?
Well, there were some forum posts this week from executive producer Athena Peters, Vivian, and they weren't getting a lot of attention, but I thought there was some interesting information in there. She was kind of going back and forth with some other posters on the official forums, trying to clarify what's going on with this server stuff that was talked about in the producer's letter earlier in the year. And basically, some of the information that came out of there was that she finally, for the first time, said that yes, we are going to be offering free transfers to higher population servers. So that's one thing that we know now that we were just kind of speculating on before. She talked about possibly opening up those free transfers to people who didn't care about whether they took their wardrobe and marks and medallions and stuff with them to the next server. Because as you remember, she said before that they don't have those systems in place yet with the server transfers. They're actually working on getting that to a place where you can take all of your stuff with you on a transfer. And but she wasn't really sure if that was going to happen or not. That's what she would like to see happen, but she doesn't want like a mass migration to bring down the servers from a performance perspective. So they're being very cautious about the way they approach all of this.
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty much excuse me. That's pretty much some of the new information. There was people concerned about, what's going to happen if your server closes. And she essentially said, I think we kind of knew this, but she confirmed that if your server is closed, you'll always have the option to move characters from that server to another open world for free. So basically, they put them in kind of a little purgatory somewhere, and if you log in and your server's been closed, you have the option to transfer them to a server that's left for free.
Yeah, I would like to add though, if you're somebody that doesn't play very often, I would recommend transferring them as quick as possible just in case the worst somehow happens and those characters that are saved somewhere from those servers are lost. I doubt that that'll happen, but they also lost the lottery system not too long ago, so you might want to move them over as soon as you can once this opens up.
Yeah, good point. She also said that she's going to have more information for us next week on things like kinships, housing, and names. So look forward to some more news on the server transfers next week. Hopefully a little bit more detail.
Okay. Now, one interesting thing I saw is that she was, because people were talking about the lag in Brandywine, and She plays on Brandywine, so so apparently her proximity though to the servers is making her not see the lag. Apparently,
Yeah, I think proximity does have something to do with it. That's why they're looking at moving those servers sometime as well. I think that the fact that they're doing that makes me think that they know proximity has something to do with the lag.
Yeah.
all right, very well. Also, the people at Lotro are looking for streamers, and where were these streamers? Are decorations?
That's what I
Finally.
was
Oh
thinking.
boy.
I was going to
Oh.
say that, but I thought, no, I'm not going to do that.
All right. Yeah. I don't know. I can't follow that up.
All right, let's all vote. Should Pineleaf still be the host? Yes or no? I'm just-
So basically, they're reaching out to people who stream Lotro on a regular basis, and it sounds like, from what Freelorn posted in the forums, that they're going to form a quote-unquote streaming group that they interact with on a consistent basis, and they're going to partner with these streamers that are out there doing Lotro streams to give them things for giveaways like free turbine point codes and things like that. They're going to potentially have the opportunity to bring game devs into their stream while they're streaming, and they're going to probably promote them through social media and stuff like that. So it sounds to me like a kind of a marketing shift for Lotro. They're moving a little bit more into the live streaming world and getting the players involved in actually marketing their product to the folks out there watching the streams.
Well, and one thing I love about the way Twitch works with stream teams is that you can, on your channel, pick any other user that you just want to share on your channel. And so this is great for game companies because they can basically build this stream team like Turbine's talking about, and share their stuff on Turbine's channel, and Twitch even links to the actual person's channel on Turbine's channel once this starts happening. So I think that that's really cool technology that Twitch has, and most MMOs are using it already. So I'm glad that Lotro is joining up on that bandwagon.
DDO has been doing this for about 2 months now, and it has been insanely popular in the DDO community. They have people streaming every day of the week, pretty much almost all day. So I can kind of see why I think Lotro wants to do this, because I think they saw how popular it was with the DDO crowd, so they're thinking it'll probably do the same over on the Lotro side as well.
Yeah, I think though that if I attempted to do well, all my attempts to do streaming tended to give images that are so ugly that I don't think it'll be worth watching.
One, for example, with like the announcement today that Guild Wars 2 had, they had their players come on right after their press conference that they streamed and just talk about the game on their own channel. That was really cool. So
That's pretty smart.
I'm really excited to see where Lotro takes it.
Yeah, this feels really nice. This feels like they're finally kind of letting go of that notion of we have to control the message all the time. They're handing it over to the players a little bit more. So I think it's a good thing too.
I go harass Freelorn every Thursday on his hour that he streams on Twitch, and so he's actually talked about this for the last few weeks or so, and basically said he's ready to anybody that wants to be part of the stream team to basically send them or send him the link to like a sample of their work, and he'll review it and get back to him. So yeah, he's really encouraging everybody.
I think Freelorn totally has like nightmares of Trish's name showing up on his attendee list at this point.
No doubt. That has to be true.
He's very nice to me when I show up.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is.
Okay. Let's head into the store sales. Drac, what's on sale this week?
The free sample of the week is a +5 attack damage for 90 minutes. You get one of those if you use a coupon code DMG85. DMG85, 1 per account. Also in the store, 20% off quest packs, mithril coins, 100% XP boost for 1 hour, and the max morale and power scrolls.
Very well, thank you. Now we'll proceed into the site news. And Lotro Players News is looking for a podcast co-host. Ending, what's this all about?
That's right. Finally, we talked about this last week, but it is still going on. We are still looking for co-hosts. We had quite a few people actually write in, but we're wanting to make sure to give everyone plenty of time to get in to do this. So if you are thinking about it and maybe not sure, go ahead and send in an audio file. The worst thing happens is that we don't pick you. As terrible as that might be, but it's worth a shot because somebody's going to become a host. So maybe it's
Well,
you.
you can only have like 20 people on at a time, and you can't go much further.
Oh, I think that'd be a bit too much even for Anding.
I don't know what that means. Anyway.
All right. And ending, we have another Lotro video highlight I see, the Helm's Deep fan trailer.
That's right, Pine Leaf. This is an awesome trailer that someone made for Helm's Deep, and basically it was made before the expansion came out, or even the beta was made public. And so what they did is they actually went through all the places we've been already and kind of put it together in an awesome trailer. And it's just really good. I recommend people watch it if you would like to be inspired for Lotro.
And speaking of very good, we have part 28 of the family line, Sorrowful Stones. And this is one that is going to chill your bones. I don't
right,
know
Pine
if
Leaf.
Anding agrees with that.
I think that's pretty apt.
Yes.
It is a very interesting story. It keeps getting better and better, Pine Leaf. It's taking it new places that it hasn't been before, and I can't wait to see where it goes next.
Very well. And we also had episode 47 of Lotro Players Adventures, The Bird Orc of Rohan. And that is a title where I actually remember where we got the title from.
Really, Pine Leaf?
Where,
Are you still going
yes,
to ask where you got it from, or are you actually going to tell
no,
people
I'm
this
not
time?
going to ask where you got it from. No. We were going around, going through searching for war bands, and it's a reference to one of the war bands.
There you go.
Very well. Anyone else have anything to add about that particular episode?
Just that we are getting kind of close to the end of Adventures. We only have a few more war bands and epic battles to do, and so if you're really interested in the show, I'd recommend checking it out.
Very well. And we also finally have a new episode of Where's Tinky, where Tinky visits Winterhome, and we have the usual challenge of trying to find the Hobbit in the yellow outfit in our usual easy, medium, hard, and there's one pixel in there challenge mode.
The Pine Leaf edition, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, challenge mode is Where's Waldo on steroids, that's for sure.
Yes. Yes, I know. Someone said that something was a little bit easy, and then she decides to do one where I think there's one person who actually found the last one, and it wasn't me, I can tell you that. And that was to, let's see, who managed to, oh, Molly Kettle was the person who was able to find it and send the proper answer to Lily Kate, since there could be someone else who found it and didn't bother sending in a message to Lily.
All right.
And speaking of Lily Kate, she also provides some reviews, pictures, and videos of Winterstock 2, which was a really huge success as far as I could tell there. I was there for part of it, and I participated in one of the performances for the Starlight Orchestra.
And this article is huge. No wonder there hasn't been a Where's Tinky in a while. She's been writing this the whole time, even though it hasn't come out.
Yeah.
I mean,
She's been doing a great bit of stuff in regards to upcoming Winterstock and other various musical things that she's been working with. So that's the reason. She has been very busy on the musical side.
yeah, and this article definitely shows it. Even if you're not a fan of Lotro's music for some reason, or you don't like these type of articles usually, just take a look at this article. It's awesome. It is definitely the best of the best for this type of thing. So I recommend if you didn't make it to Winterstock, maybe check this article out. It's really good.
I gotta say, I have never been to one of these. I mean, I'd always heard about Weatherstock and when Winterstock was
Ooh,
happening, and I never
you
had
gotta
been. And
go.
I went to Winterstock, blew me away. I was
Yeah, it's
so
good.
amazed. It was so amazed. Pine Leaf, I'm sorry I wasn't there for your performance.
Oh.
Next time, I promise I will be. But I was just really amazed at the amount of care and time it has taken these groups to do the performance. I mean, I'm speechless. It was amazing. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than some real world conference, concerts. It's amazing how great and
Concerts,
well
yeah,
orchestrated that they do this. It's really impressive.
it is. Yeah.
Right, and the next really big one will be Weatherstock, which will probably be sometime in June, is it?
Usually,
Yeah.
unless one of two things happen, they start another show because Winterstock went so well, or the system gets broken again. So as
Well,
long
we'll
as
see.
neither of those two things happen, Weatherstock will be the next thing.
We can. It looks like that they are coming up with a reasonably good system on Bull Roar. Since
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
actually now I was at Bull Roar, but I haven't had a chance to listen to any of the music on Bull Roar yet. But I was there to test out the windowed full screen mode, and that seems to be working well enough once I got my parameters set up right.
Yeah, people on the forums seem to be, um, it's kind of mixed, but they definitely think it's going in the right direction, the music system. So seems
Yes,
like it's
that's a
going
good
well.
way. Yes, there are still some things that they think might need tweaking or something like that, but hopefully they'll get that done before the. But it looks like they're going in the right direction. And one of the things that they're thinking of is what they're doing with the harp. In the end, they decided to revert the harp, but keep the new versions of the rest of the instruments, and they're thinking of introducing the new harp later on as an alternate harp or something like that. I know one person suggested using it for Gleowine's harp.
I don't know how I feel about that one, but
Yeah,
anyway.
well, we'll see. We'll see what they decide to do in the end. Now let's head on to some poetry. And we finally have Lotro Poems number 13, where we continue the story of Estelle. The goblins came in large numbers, and a troll they brought. We charged and slew many of them, even the halflings fought. But then came the shadow and fire, a foe from beyond, with deadly ire. A demon of ancient world, Balrog of Morgoth came. Fire and shadow woved in one, with a whip of flame. We ran across the bridge, but Gandalf made his stand. You cannot pass! With galantering and staff in hand. Balrog stepped forward and drew itself to great height. Its wings spread from wall to wall, ready to fight. From out of the shadow, a red sword leapt flaming, glancing glittered white. There was a ringing and clash, and a stab of fire, and Gandalf showed his true might. We ran to help the wizard, our guide, our friend, but he lifted his staff. He smote the bridge before him. The bridge cracked, breaking it in half. Fly, ye fools! He fell into the abyss with the demon and was gone. But there was no time to mourn. I had to lead the fellowship on. We escaped darkness of Moria into the light of day. Our fellowship broken, our hearts grim and fey.
That was an awesome poem, and Corey,
I'm snapping my fingers at you and Right.
Corey, I expect at least a 2-hour podcast on that poem based on previous things. So
Well, the one immediate comment I would make is I was listening to it, and I could tell it was coming to an end, and I was just hoping beyond hope that Faye would be the last word. So I was really, really happy that they went there. That was good.
All right, very well. Then let's head into Brax's pick of the week.
Yeah, so Sip wrote an article about LOTRO over on BioBreak, his personal gaming blog, and sometimes I don't talk about Sip when he writes something really, really good, because everything he writes is really, really good, and I want to give other people a chance in this slot. But considering the guests we have this week, it was just totally appropriate to bring up this article, which is called "Reading the Books Through the Lens of the Game," and it's over at BioBreak, like I said. And what he's talking about is he played the game. Well, he read the books back in, I think he said college, which was 1998, 99 or so. But he hasn't read them again since then. And since then, he started playing the game and has played through it multiple times. And so now when he started reading the books again this year, he's picturing some of these places from Lord of the Rings Online, and the books are making more sense to him. And I just wanted to read a couple paragraphs here, give you a taste of what he's talking about. He said, "But as I've been reading the story, I've realized that I can't help but do so from the vantage point of a LOTRO gamer. I know that probably many fans of the game had extensive knowledge of the books first and went into LOTRO that way, but I'm coming at it almost the other way around. Everything I read in the book, I'm thinking of where I might have seen it or heard about it in the game. While that might be a horrific thought to novel lore purists, it's actually really neat. When I was younger, I always felt a little lost in Lord of the Rings, especially with the weird names, barrage of locations, and extensive fictional world story. But now I realize that the game has provided me with a solid education on all of these things and more besides. So not only am I constantly making connections between the two, but it's deepened my enjoyment of the book." So I just thought that was kind of a cool thing because of what we talked about earlier that Dr. Olson is doing with the kind of comparing what the game and the books are doing and how they relate to one another and how they're the same and how they're different. I think there's probably a lot of people in the same situation as Sip, as they started with the game or they started with the films and then went to the game and haven't read the books. And it's probably an interesting experience for them to go into the books and kind of have this picture in their head already. And it might even help to visualize what's going on a little bit more than somebody who just dove right into the books, which were written in a language that's much different than what we're used to seeing today.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I hear what you're saying, that, you know, there are some sort of people who really, especially people who sort of started from the books, who would kind of cringe to hear that, you know. And I know one of the things that a lot of people, you know, I remember, you know, when the films were coming out, one of the things, I remember knowing a few people who were Tolkien fans who didn't want to see them, who resisted for a long time seeing the films because they didn't want the sort of the picture of, you know, Aragorn and Gimli and Gandalf that they had in their head for their whole lives to get, you know, like basically, you know, I remember having exactly that conversation, saying like, I don't want to be picturing Viggo Mortensen when I read The Lord of the Rings. Like, I don't want that to be my picture. So, and I understand that, but, you know, coming the other way around, it's really true. And I would say, you know, there's even something that I feel that that I've learned from playing LOTRO just in the last few months. Well, not learned exactly, but I now, even I used to get confused. I think a lot of people still get confused, but even I used to get confused. If you had asked me a year ago, I would probably have gotten wrong exactly where the kingdoms of Arthedain and Rhudaur and Cardolan lay. I'm like, okay, I know that the Arnor are split up into the three kingdoms, and I can name them. But if you'd asked me, if you'd given me a blank map and asked me to draw where Arthedain and Cardolan and Rhudaur were, I don't think I would have done it accurately. That's, I was never, I just didn't keep a clear picture of that in my head. Well, I have it pretty clear now, you know, having spent the time that I have in the North Downs and the Lowlands and the Barrow Downs, I'm pretty clear now on where those three kingdoms are. But again, you know, Brax, it's exactly like you say. when you are, when you're kind of living within that visual world, when you have that to kind of hold on to, as you are going through the books, it gives you something more rather than just, especially because so much of Tolkien loves names. He loves his languages and he loves names, and names are so important to him. But it means that for a lot of people, for the non-philologists out there, those names don't just pop off the page like they did for Tolkien. And so for a lot of people, it's just names, without much in the way of sort of imaginative force behind it, that is a force in the reader's own imagination. LOTRO really helps add that, I think, and I can easily see that happening for a lot of people.
I agree with that. It's true. I mean, I know many of the students at Mythgard Institute came from the films to the books, and I totally get what Sip is saying here in terms of, having a new appreciation of the books, or a deep appreciation of the books because of having been in the game. I think it's another way of coming to Tolkien. Is as Lily Kate says in the chat room, there's enough Tolkien for every approach.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of the chat room, are there any questions or the like in the chat room?
There are, from a long time ago. Frodos has been waiting for this question to be asked. He asked, there are no cemeteries in the Shire. Is this because no one knows what Hobbit funeral or burial is like?
It's a really wonderful point. I hadn't noticed that in the game, but I mean, of course, you're right. And I can't think of any even indirect reference to Hobbit burial traditions in the books, which is surprising. I mean, you think of the Concerning Hobbits introduction, the prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring, and where it talks in depth about their crafts and their architecture and their clothing, and it's so much about their culture. I can't remember even an oblique reference to their burial practices.
Yeah, and
I'm guessing they go underground. They have like
they just get buried right back in their homes.
They make these. Yeah, they just go underground.
Well, so they just like brick up their bedroom or something?
Well, yeah, either that or they have like dedicated Hobbit holes, that are specifically for putting bodies.
Well, it's funny because there's not even any of the kind of linguistic. I mean, you think of the expressions, the figures of speech that we use, which betray the fact that we, customarily bury our dead, right? I mean, hobbits don't say anything like that. I mean, you don't ever hear anybody talk about being dead and buried, or I'll be cold in the earth before.
I just had a really horrible thought.
Yeah.
You know how much they like to eat? Hobbits like to eat.
Right. You're crying out loud. Yeah.
Maybe that's why it's never mentioned.
The secret cannibalistic subculture.
Nothing like me bringing the show down, huh? Sorry.
Yeah.
Well,
That's a scouring of the Shire, man.
Yeah. What I was thinking of is maybe they cremate the bodies and use the ashes as fertilizer.
There you go. See, Pilate.
I think I like the idea of not knowing what happens.
That's very dark, finally. That's very dark.
Right. It's like let's. Yeah. No. Wait. No. Hang on. Wait. I'm forgetting. I just remembered one. A reference.
Ooh.
After the Battle of Bywater, in the end.
Oh right.
They bury in a sand pit. They bury the dead brigands in a sand pit. And what does it say? I'm doing that thing. One of these days, I'm gonna actually build a bookshelf for my urgent Tolkien books that's within reach of where I sit when I podcast. I don't know how many times I've been sitting here in a live broadcast staring at the spine of my copy of The Lord of the Rings.
Get
across
a wireless headset. Get a wireless headset.
Yeah, I should do that too. Or a longer cord. But anyway, Somebody look it up. So, I'm pretty sure because then they say because they're the Hobbit heroes, of course, who are killed in the Battle of Bywater and whose names are learned by heart by Shire historians in the future. But isn't there a reference there? I mean, I think they're buried. I think they've got to be buried. But I don't. But it's not in mounds. You would see them. They would be visible. There would be some reference at some time to the mounds of the barrows in The Hobbit.
So we need to ask the devs this then the next time we visit Turbine, because Fredless has a very good point. Is there are no cemeteries in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I find it interesting how, the dwarves are definitely, we know, even though we don't know about their language and stuff like that, we know about their tombs because Moria is basically, considered a giant tomb, kind of, sort of. And
Well, right. Yeah,
so, it's really
and
interesting.
in fact, they make a big deal about the one that the dwarves at the end of the Battle of Moria were burned because,
right? Exactly.
because that's the only thing they could do at the time.
And then you look at Rohan where they have all the detail on the king's mounds and the flowers growing on
Right.
them and all that stuff. And then
Right.
you get to, Minas Tirith and there's a lot of detail there. But
Right. The
yeah.
Silent Street and.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but see, and that's exactly why I find it odd that there's so few references in the Shire because it's not like Tolkien's afraid to talk about that.
Yeah,
Right.
okay. I got it for you.
Yeah.
Yay.
In Return of the King, during the I'm sorry, not Return of the King. What am I saying? The fallen hobbits were laid together in a grave on the hillside.
Yep.
Where later a great stone was set up with a garden about it. So ended the Battle of the Bywater, 1419, the last battle fought in the Shire, and the only battle since the Greenfields of 1147.
That's the passage I was looking for. Yep. Yep.
But isn't it, I actually, as I listen to you guys say this, isn't this just another example of sort of the way Tolkien differentiates the hobbits?
Mhm.
We were talking earlier about how the quests in the Shire and the game are so different. That's very Tolkienian. He sort of sets them apart. They are so that's actually interesting. There's a paper in there somewhere.
Well,
Next myth food.
Yeah. Because here's another angle on that too. Of course, the level of commemoration that the dead get. Remember, that's correlated with a pretty significant when your culture really gets out of whack, you can tell when you start building really huge and elaborate tombs.
Right.
I mean, that was one of the signs of the decline of Numenor and one of the signs of the decline of Gondor. When they built tombs more grand than the homes of the living. So the fact that you don't get any prominent burial grounds, there are no big cemeteries. I get the fact that nothing is ever referred to as a landmark. You'd think there would be. If there were mounds, as we see before Edoras, you'd think that would get referred to. The whole way in which they talk about the Barrow Downs suggests that kind of thing, like that, those kinds of burial mounds are foreign to the hobbits. It doesn't sound like, I mean, okay, presumably the hobbits' own barrows aren't like infested with the Walking Dead, but nevertheless, even if that weren't the case, I would still expect them to kind of talk about it differently.
Yeah.
But again, so the fact that the hobbits make not a big deal about the dead, about the bodies of the dead, about the burial of the dead, seems I think perhaps to correlate with like the wholesomeness of their culture, really.
Good point. Creeping hands, yes, creeping hands.
Creeping
No creeping hands in the Shire.
So
No
impressive.
creeping hands in the Shire, right? Instead, you have a flower garden where the
That's
dead
right.
were.
That's right. And that one reference to burial and that one grave site, which clearly will become a comparatively prominent landmark, is not really to commemorate the it's not about the dead, it's about the battle. It's about
Right.
commemorating those who fell in battle. Even the passage emphasizes that context, right? Thus ended the Battle of Bywater, first battle in the Shire since the Battle of Greenfields. So it's to commemorate what the hobbits did in rising up to defend their homes, it's not about like let's make a big deal of the dead and of the bodies of the dead, in particular. Which again, that's what tombs and even barrows um, kind of are. I
Right.
mean, right? I mean, the point of a barrow is that you not only have a burying spot for the dead person, but you also have like that's why there's treasure in barrows, right? Because you want to put all this stuff in there and make a big deal about, about like, oh, he's taking all his stuff with him and whatever. Well, the hobbits don't do that. They
Right.
don't. They don't. Um, they're not gonna. They're not going to bury you with your stuff. They're just going to, So the fact that it's really low key and not referred to seems to me perhaps it's a kind of sort of a piece of negative evidence for that.
All right. Thank you on that. So now let's ask, are there any more questions?
I don't think so, but that was an awesome question, Fredulous. That was
Okay.
That was.
fantastic.
All right then, let's head into the skirmish of the week. And in here we will have a face-off on the argument of what depiction of something in the Tolkienian world is best, whether we're talking about the books, the films, or the games. And this week it is, what is your favorite depiction of the socio-political situation between the dwarves and the elves? And our moderator this week will be Draculetta and Drac.
All I'm saying is good luck to you all.
I want to go ahead and get this out of the way. Dr. Olson picked this topic, so I think the rest of us should have a handicap. Plus, he's a doctor,
No,
so
no,
that's
no.
another
Dr. Olson
handicap.
already has a handicap. He has me on his team. So yeah, because I'm terrible at debates. So and skirmishes. I'm not very good at skirmishes either. So
Okay, Pine Leaf already did say what the question was, but I'll repeat it in case anybody missed it. It is, what is your favorite depiction of the socio-political situation between the dwarves and the elves? And I think we're going to start with Pine Leaf this week.
All right, very well. This week I am going to side with the games. In this case, when I say the games, I mean LOTRO. I have not delved into the social political situation of the relationship within any other depictions that there have been. So if Anding wants to talk about Shadow of Mordor, be my guest.
Are there
But
dwarfs in the Shadow of Mordor?
I can't give a spoiler, but there might be.
All right. How tantalizing.
It's very
Yes.
probable that there are dwarves
Okay. Okay.
in the
Yeah.
Shadow of Mordor.
Well,
Why
at
they're in
least-
Mordor, I don't know, but it's very probable.
Okay.
Dour hands. No.
yeah.
All right. I would say that it is LOTRO. Why LOTRO over the books or in the films is very definitely over the films, because in the films, what do we have? We have that crazy thing, all the things that are being done concerning elves and they have enough things that are so off base on elves in general that I can't believe anything that happens in relation to the elves in there. For example, our infamous thing about the elves in Helm's Deep and stuff like that. But in the case of the case in the games, you're able to get a feel of what they are. In the case of the books, they're talking about dredging memories. They have a couple of references to it, but there's very little except for the Council of Elrond and developing a relationship between Gimli and Legolas, where are able to see it. But in the game, you can feel it all over the place. You have it over in Ered Luin, where you have this tension that's been brought up from the very beginning of the tutorial all the way throughout the introduction and the prologue, where you see this tension before them and how they're not enemies, but they are distrustful for each other. And when you bring in a more dire enemy and finding out what's really happening, then they're willing to work with each other. And this becomes important, for example, in the Siege of Gondomin, because that's all about. And that'll be our next thing in Myth Monday.
That's right. That's right.
Nice lead-in, Pine Leaf. I like that.
Pine Leaf is the king of segues, so yeah.
He
That's
is.
great.
Does anybody have any rebuttals to that?
Well, I think first of all we should, go around having everyone present
Okay.
which side they're on. So I'm on the same team as Pineleaf. I'm representing the games, and I'm thankful after that very good introduction, Pineleaf. Brax, what team are you on?
The films.
I'm sorry. Trish and Corey,
Really?
which team are you guys on?
Books.
The books.
Surprise,
Oh, what a
surprise.
shock.
It's hard. I actually would have made a gesture at arguing for LOTRO, but I'm still too ignorant to be able to speak with too much authority about the LOTRO depictions. I've done Ered Luin pretty thoroughly, so I mean I can talk about that, but hard for me to say that I could really make an argument about elves and dwarves in LOTRO when I've never been either to Moria or Lothlorien, so I kind of felt like that disqualified me.
And yes, that same tension that you have in Erluin also, does permeate through the story of Moria and Lothlorien.
Pineleaf, I'll get to my points when they come, okay?
Okay.
I have these lined out in the show notes, and you're just stealing my answers. Drac, let's let another side go ahead and debate.
All right, Brax, let's hear what you're saying about the films.
Well, I mean these other two sides, they're both great. I'm not going to do any mudslinging tonight. I'm not going to cut anybody down or cut their legs out from under them or say that the
Oh, God,
films
now
are
I'm
terrible.
worried.
So the reason I'm arguing for the films tonight is because I think they do such a great job of beating you over the head with the fact that the elves and dwarves don't like each other because they've got such a limited time frame in which to convey this message. The whole never trust an elf thing, and every time Thorandil comes within 20 miles of Thorin, you just see how he has an aneurysm. It's just crazy. They hate each other. And they beat
There's
you
an
over.
outside chance that Thorin might have issues.
They beat you over the head with this so hard, but at the same time, they use it mostly for comedic effect. I mean, there's so many funny moments between between elves and dwarves, like when they're trying to sneak through Lothlorien and the elves show up and talk about how loud Gimli's breathing and all this other stuff. And I think that's really good because the things that the elves and the dwarves are fighting about, sociopolitically speaking, they're petty things. I mean, they just don't like each other for no good reason. They're basically racist against one another, and it's stupid because they're always on the same team. It's just that, they're not seeing eye to eye because they're different. Their cultures are different. And I think the fact that they use this beating over the head with it to make it kind of comedic on the other side of things really kind of illustrates that.
Okay, let's hear from Trish about the books then.
Okay. Well, I took the phrase "the books" to mean the books. Like the Silmarillion forward sort of thing. And the thing about, for me, the books, they gave me, the background. I mean, especially the Silmarillion. I mean, I read Lord of the Rings, and a lot of that same sort of, elves hating dwarves and dwarves hating elves were kind of in when I first read the Lord of the Rings, and it was kind of like, okay, well, that's kind of a given. And there was some, there is explanation of it. For example, the dwarves awakening Durin's Bane in Moria, kind of put the elves in Holland off a little bit, I think. But in the Silmarillion, you really get the real background. Even from the way dwarves first came into the world, there's such a difference. And then there's like long-standing issues, from Thingol and on forward, and the sort of questionable nature of dwarves and whatnot, on through. And so by the time you get to the Lord of the Rings, like when I watch the movies or I'm in the game, I have that background in my mind. I kind of know that backstory, and so it brings a better understanding for me to the present moment. Whether it's with my mouse or whether I'm in the theater, I get it now. Brax is right. I mean, they compressed it and kind of made it a much shorter story in a much shorter time span in like The Hobbit to explain it. But the books actually give you the more, longer term, eon long, animosity for the most part. So that's why I said the books.
Okay, let's go back to the game then with Andang.
Yes, well, Pineleaf already, got into kind of the zones that I was going to talk about because he can read. Arid Lewin is a good example of the relationship because it's the starter zone for both the elves and the dwarves, and it gets the players right in to show how the relationship is, and it even shows the bad side of the dwarves with the dour hands and shows the bad side of the elves with the elves, and so it does a good job of showing how they relate both economically because there's references to trade and things like that a little bit in the quest that you do, and especially politically because it talks about the entire situation of the region and how they kind of came together but not really at all in the game. And then you move on to Moria and Lothlorien, where part of the story, a bit of a spoiler alert here, is essentially, I mean, we get out of Moria. We don't want to go back in, but the elves do. The elves are willing to go back in. How much better can you show the political and friendliness situation between the elves and the dwarves when the players don't even want to go where the elves are going to go to help the dwarves? I can't think of a better argument than that. I mean, that's...
You live it, right? You live the socio-political situation.
That's right.
All right. Are you done, Andang?
Yeah, I'll conclude there for now.
Okay. Let's hear from Dr. Olson then.
Okay, well, the thing that I want to spotlight about the book's depiction of the elves and dwarves is that is particularly in The Hobbit, and I really like. Although we get so much less detail in The Hobbit than we get, well, really anywhere else in Tolkien's work about, well, really anything. But the thing that I really like about the depiction of the elves and the dwarves is the balancing act that Tolkien successfully undertakes to show how the elves and the dwarves are quarreling with each other and both have very well justified quarrels, and their dislike for each other is grounded on perfectly reasonable grounds, and yet neither one of them is really wrong. So that when we come around at the end, you can see in the Battle of Five Armies, the elves and dwarves plus Bard and the humans, are about to come to blows. Like shots have actually been fired, and then Gandalf comes up and says the goblins are here. And the way in which, in Riddles in the Dark, we're sort of joking about the fact that that's really probably not going to work on screen to have them like leaping towards each other and just have Gandalf pop up in the middle and say, "Time out, goblins are here," and everybody turn around. And of course, that's not exactly how it worked out in the film, but let's not talk about that. Anyway, the point is that the thing that Tolkien really emphasizes there is, yes, the elves and dwarves don't like each other, and yes, they're willing even to go to battle against each other. But when the chips are down, there's no question that in both of their minds, the elves and dwarves, like, they dislike each other. But there's not a question of like them being in the same category as the goblins, right? They know. This is why, again, the really striking thing, like Dan comes out of the camp of the dwarves and like walks alone into the camp of the people who were just shooting at him 5 minutes ago, and they're like, "Oh, hey guys, let's fight the goblins together. Let's work together on this," because there's like this recognition, despite the fact that they have their grievances against each other, that fundamentally, they are on one side, whereas creatures like the goblins are on the other side. And that turn at the end would be really unsatisfying if it were clear that one of them, the elves or the dwarves, were really in the wrong, and that if one of them were justified and the other. So he's got to keep it really balanced for that to be able to work at the end, for us to be able to have the situation that emerges not just in the battle but afterwards, of the harmony between the elves and the dwarves, and of course the humans, that we see there at the end of The Hobbit. And I just think he does that brilliantly, especially in the interrogation of Thorin scene before the Elven King in the book. In Mirkwood, it's really, you can easily see both sides of their argument, right? You can easily see how the Elven King would think that this was really suspicious. We've got these vagabond dwarves, who won't tell us where they're going and won't tell us what they're doing, and like why were they and why did they burst in on our festivities? He says
Three
that they're
times.
starving, right? Three times. And that was, and I usually joke about this, but of course when you read the Silmarillion and you see the number of times that enemies broke in and did horribly disastrous things during times of festival, in the Silmarillion, you can understand why the elves are a little jumpy when they're trying to have a festival, and these guys keep jumping out of the woods and they're like panic, and run away. But of course, similarly, you can easily see Thorin's point of view. He's like, we were just coming to you without pride to beg for help because we're starving, and here you've taken us prisoner, and like, no, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna tell you like where I am and what I'm doing. Like, if you can't tell that, so I mean, it's really easy to see both sides of that. So I think that the way, because that's in order to have the two of them being, in tension, the elves and the dwarves being in tension, and yet fundamentally allies, fundamentally on the same side of the good versus evil equation. Tolkien has to do a really delicate balancing act. I think he does it brilliantly in The Hobbit, and I think that, it's something that that he certainly kind of maintains, in The Lord of the Rings as well, though it's not so much of a feature as it is, in The Hobbit. But it's that balance, being able to put it both ways, that I think, the book's depiction is really marvelous with.
Boom.
Moderator, Sir Moderator,
Yes, sir.
would it be okay if I just concede at this point?
So okay, so I'll talk about the films.
Brax.
This is the I grant the fact that the films are doing a different thing and they have so much less time to develop things, but of course the difficulty with the films is that, like, Gimli looks like a git for really most of the film, but especially at the beginning of the whole like never trust an elf thing. It's like, wait, what? Like never? I mean, never at all. In the history of the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain, that kind of sentiment doesn't really make all that much sense. And I get the fact that, to some extent, both the medium and the scale of a film, that is how short it is, kind of means, I mean, there's this tendency to kind of exaggerate things. Not just dumbing it down, but just kind of, I don't know, amplifying it to make sure that this thing gets across in the really short time that you have to convey this stuff. So, it's not that I think it needs to be exactly the same, and I understand, but it does seem kind of, the film depiction in that way does end up seeming kind of ham-fisted in that way, of the like, first we are wholly and like overtly prejudiced against each other in sort of really stereotypical ways, and then, oh, we all decide that we're best friends later on.
Yes.
Brax, I want to ask you this. If you were, since you're not, you decide you're not going to argue for the films now, which side would you pick to join?
If you're going to defect. Yeah.
Oh.
No, I've been married a long time. I'm not going to answer that question.
Good answer, Brax. Good answer.
And yet he can't argue for the films, man.
Oh, does anybody have any rebuttals to that?
To that, maybe not, but I can keep on debating if you want.
Hey, if you want to be brave enough to go, go.
Okay, so I think the main thing with the games, continuing the spoilerific talk here, is, once you get the elves into Moria, you then talk them into this crazy plan to actually take a dwarf around Lothlorien fairly closely to the elves. And then you broker this whole agreement, and then the elves actually help you along, because they were getting ready to invade Mirkwood anyway. And they decide, okay, we're going to help. Well, they aren't exactly this cooperative, but they're like, okay, we're going to go and help you go to Dol Guldur and we'll try to help the dwarf and all that stuff. Things go terribly awry, and then you really start to see the tensions between the elves and the dwarves. This is the part of the story where it really comes out, and you can tell why these races really don't like each other, and just along this journey, let alone all the back history that's happened before. And then you see one of the dwarves actually go ahead and basically do the right thing. And you see how they come back together, and it shows an entire development of both sides, and it shows when they're friends, when they're not friends on both sides, and I think it's a fantastic example of the relationship between elves and dwarves.
That's very cool. I'm really looking
That is
forward
very
to that.
cool.
I,
That is very cool.
the
Oh
one,
yes, that is a wonderful moment.
the one thing, the one criticism that I would have to make of the Ered Luin depiction, because again, I haven't been to Moria Lothlorien yet, but I have done Ered Luin from both sides, elf and dwarf, and I there's one small thing that kind of disappointed me about it, and that is that the business, which actually I kind of liked at first, and that is the business about how the elves like can't tell a dour hand from a long beard, right? You know, and they're just like dwarves is dwarves, and like with, and I at first I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, but then the more I thought about it, I'm like, actually, that's not cool. That's kind of dumb. Like these elves must be like, why am I playing an elf who just fell off the turnip truck? Like, why have all of the elves in Ered Luin apparently just fallen off the turnip truck? Like you're telling me that these elves, many of whom have explicitly been there, you know, for thousands of years. I mean, we're, you know, like from like second, you know, in first age, are still like, oh yeah, but we've paid so little attention to the dwarves that live just up the road. We have this idea.
Well, I think
Um,
that that's kind of just a racist expression. You have similar things that took place in America at various parts during their history. I think that, you know, what it does show, though, is that basically the elves kind of say, well, maybe these dwarves could turn at any moment. And, you know, that's, I think, a valid criticism. Obviously, they take it a little bit farther with the language they use just because they're elves. But I think it ends up working out fairly well.
Yeah, I mean it's not awful, but again, I mean there's clearly, especially I'm thinking of the dialogue of, I forget her name, the elf commander at Gondaman, you know, she's like the trigger happy one who's all
Hmm.
like, we're gonna go to war with those dwarves. And you know, your whole quest line as the elf is to like, you know, find some way to like talk you know, the 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 hawk elf general down off the edge, you know. So, but anyway, like do something to prove that this is okay. Anyway, it just seems just really kind of simplistic. I mean, you're
Yeah.
right. This kind of thing happens all the time. But again, like, you know, and as you say, there are many examples in the history of America, but the entire history of America is a tiny drop in the bucket compared to how long these elves are supposed to have been there paying close attention to their surroundings. So, but anyway, you know, like
Do
I
you
said,
really
it
trust
was,
an elf though with their surroundings? I mean, let's be honest here. Throughout the Silmarillion, I mean,
but at least they did know the difference. I mean, and that's the thing, is that in the context of the history of elf dwarf relations, you know, the elves were very aware of the different houses of the
yeah.
dwarves. Even back in the Silmarillion, I mean, the difference between the elves of Nogrod and the elves of Belegost. I mean, it was the dwarves of Nogrod who had the problem with Thingol, and the dwarves of Belegost stayed out of it. Um, and not to mention, you know, the difference between, you know, like the dwarves of the great houses there and the petty dwarves like Mime,
Yeah.
that Turin runs into. So I guess I just, in the end, I couldn't buy this whole like dwarves is dwarves and we don't care subplot of the Ered Luin thing. But it's a small criticism. I actually do think the balance in the general storylines is really interesting, and I liked that. You know, Trish and I were talking about this the other night. I really like that little quest line that you get at the first. That first camp that you meet in the Trollshaws,
Hmm.
with remember
Hmm.
the dwarven emissaries who are coming over, and they lose their gems, and you've, you know, got this whole like, let's go into like the, you know, the world of what are those things called? The claws, the
The cave
Oh,
claws.
cave claws.
yeah, the
Yeah,
cave plus,
yeah.
yeah, the
So you gotta like
burrows.
fight off like half the cave claws on Earth in order to defend this guy and get the jewels back, which of course apparently the trolls stole anyway. But whatever. The point is, it's like, oh great, so I've been slaughtering cave claws for no reason. Anyway,
Except you need 120 for your first tier deed anyway, so it's okay.
right, that's true. That's true. But the point is, the element of that storyline that I find so interesting is the ignorance that is betrayed by that dwarf. Right, when he is clearly operating under the impression, if we don't have this gift to bring, to Glowin for him to present to Elrond, this is going to be a major, shame, and
Right.
Elrond is going to be offended and everything else. And you've got the elves, like even the elves right there in the camp who are like, dude, really, it's fine.
Really,
Like,
it's okay. Yeah.
Well, I
Elrond's
think
not like that,
I think that's
You're wound way too tight, dude.
I think that's
Yeah.
representing though the amount of lack of just relationship that they've had.
Right.
The elves like to be by themselves, the dwarves like to be by themselves, and they just don't interact with each other that much to find out what the other
You're
side
right.
is really like.
I suspect that dwarf that at that camp must have been the one who thought that going to Rivendell was like it was depicted in Peter Jackson's movie in The Hobbit.
They'll make him eat leaves. That's right, Pine. They'll make him eat leaves.
But isn't that so normal, really? As you say, Andang, they haven't had, like if they have not had a lot of interaction, that the dwarf would assume, because dwarves would do that. That's how the dwarf court would be.
Mhm.
The dwarf would expect that, the leader would expect to be getting gifts. So he's just simply thinking that Elrond's going to be the same. I mean, that's just kind of normal. But it's a really good point, though, because they have no basis of reference, so they're using their own culture as their point of reference.
And I think that with Ered Luin, it's kind of the same thing, where until the time of Lotro takes place, they haven't really been working together that much. There's been trade that's been going on, but they haven't been actually fighting alongside each other. And even in the Ered Luin zone, they don't really do that too much. But it does kind of show that they're willing to trade, but that's about where it ends, and they still don't feel too safe with each other.
All right, I think we've had enough time here, Drac.
Yes, I was just about to say, I think I have enough to declare my judgment here.
Okay.
First off, I just want to say we're all winners here, aren't we?
Except Brax.
I picked the hard one.
You did.
Pineleaf, you gave a valid points. Anding, you did as well. Brax, buddy, you tried. You really did. It's gonna come as no surprise. I'm going to say the winners are going to be Trish and Dr. Olson, which should shock nobody. But as I said, we're all winners here.
That's like going against. That's like going against a world champion when you say you're the high school champion of something, and then you're going against the world champion, and you say, "Do you have any hope of winning this competition?"
Well, it's also, I mean, this, to me, primarily the question is sort of, I mean, you've got like the original lore and then the things that are adapted from the
That's
original
true.
lore. It's
Yeah.
there are things I think that you can make the argument that are because Lotro has had to be in the business of thinking through things and asking questions which Tolkien never did ask. I mean, this was one of the things that I just love listening to Chris Pearson from Turbine talk about, because he's really great about this, to be talking about those questions of, well, surely they would have had to do this, or these things would had to have existed in order for us to see what we see in The Lord of the Rings. And so there are times, therefore, when things get fleshed out in ways which, which just aren't fleshed out in the book because the book doesn't go there, but Lotro does. So there certainly are things, I think, that the game does better than the books in that way. But with larger sort of thematic issues like that, it's kind of hard because I mean, it's derived from the book. So
It is, and I was going to say that too. It's like Lotro I mean, the fact that we can even have this conversation, I think, is shows how well LOTRO draws from the books. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, it's that's the thing. It's like the books are obviously the sort of the foundation, but they've done such a good job extrapolating or doing just what Corey said. You know, there has to be this kind of situation, or, you know, what would a dwarf coming to Elrond's, to Rivendell, how would they be thinking? You know, I mean, I think they've just really done a nice job of that.
Yeah, and
But for me, it's like the root of it is really the book. So
yeah, and I mean, I think, we've discussed off air that, the book answer is probably going to win most weeks just because it's the source material. Of course it's going to win most weeks.
and
But,
Andang leads every time Andang leads a fellowship at Mythgard Monday. The name of his team is the Book Answer.
that's right.
Team Book Answer. That's right.
Team Book Answer. Excuse me.
And, I think that the main thing here is just to, if in reality, we would all probably pick the book answer at the end of the day, except for on certain things, like Dr. Olson said. But I think the important thing is just to, have a way to discuss the lore in a kind of interesting way, where it's kind of comparing the different issues and showing, how it all kind of ties together and creates this larger picture of Tolkien's work and the people who have kind of interpreted it through different ways. And I think that that's a really cool thing to be able to do.
I'm going to get the films to win one of these days.
Well, Brax won with the
Alright.
games last week, so he did
Yeah.
pretty good. Yeah.
You can always slip me that 20 under the table, Brax. See what I can do about that for you.
All right, let's go into our closers then. We did not receive any Patreon mentions this week, but we would love your support. To help support LOTRO players, simply go to the donations page where you can support the Players Alliance on Patreon. There you will find rewards, including a mention on the podcast of your choice, or even to be a guest for an episode of LOTRO Players News or Adventures. So if you want to be at Adventures, you better act quickly. As for feedback, we did not receive any iTunes reviews this week, but we do have 2 featured comments. And the first one is from Zimzibu on new information on LOTRO server transfers. I really like this new openness. Not that Sapiens or Freylorn have been close-lipped, but in comparison, Peters is practically giving us a blow-by-blow commentary on Turbine's intentions. I like it.
Absolutely. It's been amazing the amount of communication that has come out. I mean, it's basically multiple posts a day. It's absolutely amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. Very well. And Brax, could you please read Kaylee Starshine's?
Yeah, Kaylee also commented on the LOTRO server transfers post, and she says there was a lot of, just to set this up, there was a lot of discussion about what's going to happen with the low population servers, because they weren't really mentioned in any of the conversation that Athena had in the forums. Kaylee says, what it looks like Turbine is likely to do, and I hope this is the case, is to let those who wish to move to a more highly populated servers do so first, for free, for some length of time. At that point, they will see how many players are left on the lower population servers and make a determination of how many servers they want to maintain for those players. Hopefully they will allow players to indicate somehow their wish to play on a lower population servers and label a few servers as such. Then let those players move to those servers for free. Hopefully as many players as possible can be accommodated in accordance to their playstyle, and Turbine will see the need to keep a few servers to accommodate those who desire a less populated world.
All right, thank you. We did not receive any emails this week, but if you'd like to send us one, you could send it to podcast@lotroplayers.com, and you can also follow us at Twitter. The Players Alliance at Players Ally, LOTRO Players at LOTRO Players, Andang at PVMP_Andang, Braxwolf at Braxwolf, Draculetta at Draculetta_72, and Pineleaf at Pineleaf Needles. And you can also follow our guests, Dr. Olson at Tolkien Prof, and Trish at Trish Lambert. Now, is there anybody here who have anything they wish to give as final words or thoughts on plugs?
Mythgard.
Yes.
Mythgard.
Mythgard. Come
Mythgard
join
Mondays.
the kinship.
Yeah,
Mythgard
yeah.
kinship. Mythgard Mondays. our kin is growing, and we welcome new members all the time, and it's a really fun group. And we welcome anybody from any kin at Mythgard Mondays. Bird and Baby, 9:30 Eastern on Monday nights.
That's right. Yeah, the establishment of the Mythgard kin has been a lot of fun, and it's been really fun to watch that grow. And of course, one of the things to keep in mind is that Mythgard is an entirely online entity, right? I mean, we're an educational institution, but our students are all over the world. LOTRO has actually given us an opportunity to build a kind of community among many of our students. It's been another vehicle. I mean, of course, our students talk over social media and stuff like that, and we get together for conferences like MythMoot occasionally. But LOTRO has been a really great way for our students to connect with each other, and not just our students, of course, but for many people to be able to connect with us. That just has really been remarkable, even in that way. So it's been we are very excited to be meeting more people and getting to know more people, and I'm looking forward to doing more events with our kinship in our kin house and stuff like that. That element of doing LOTRO, I mean, I saw starting LOTRO as purely a lore interest, sort of research thing when I started. And the way in which the kinship and Mythgard Mondays have developed into a really wonderful kind of community experience has been really kind of a wonderful surprise for me.
All right, thank you. The Players Alliance has 3 live shows every week on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 8:30 p.m. United States Eastern Time. On Mondays, we have DDO Players News. On Thursdays, we have Guild Wars Players News. And on Saturdays, we have LOTRO Players News. And remember that Eastern Time is the same thing as server time. And you can join us for our live shows at lotroplayers.com/live. You can also join us on Langeville for LOTRO Players Adventures each Saturday at 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Thank you everyone for listening, and remember to skirmish responsibly.